To get this started, to some it might not sound scary, but having a stranger press against you and block you from leaving is horrifying, especially when you're young. Normally, I try to cover for my mother, but as I've grown older, I kind of blame her a bit, especially after what she said. She just loves to invalidate her oldest daughter. I'd say I was around 8 at the time this took place. At the time, we had to get mail from the post office in town. So seeing my mom get the mail, my brain decided, wow, I want to be cool and get the mail like mom. That childish need to prove that I was mature. Eventually, after time and time of begging, my mom let me get the mail. Now, to the actual story. I guess it was a weekend as the post office was closed, but you could still grab mail, just no people that worked there were there. I asked my mom if I could grab the mail as we slowly pulled up outside the post office. She nodded and gave me the keys that had the mail key, and a few others. So loud and jingly keys, I jumped out of the old van and ran up to the ramp to the building, avoiding the stairs completely. I opened the door and saw a lady and a man getting their mail. But turning to my side, I saw an older man sitting in the corner staring at me. He gave me a weird vibe even as a kid. But still, I gave him a quick smile and wave. Bad move. The man smiled back, revealing his stained teeth. I walked past him and went to the mailbox. Me being me though, I forgot what key was what, and began fumbling awkwardly as the others grabbing mail left the building. After maybe 3 to 5 minutes of trying and failing, I finally unlocked it. I was so happy that I disregarded the man staring as I grabbed the mail. With a quick click of the lock, I closed the box and began to walk away. I found the gaze of the man as he looked at me. A crooked smile across his face. The look he gave me still gives me chills to this day, almost a decade later. I put my open hand against the door and began to push when a pair of arms reached around me, one hand forcefully pulling the door shut and the other around the upper part of my chest, like my collarbone, pulling me into a tight, unwelcomed, and horrible hug. I froze. What was I supposed to do? I was always taught to respect adults, and I did. He had a strong scent of alcohol on him, so much I think I coughed a few times. He began to speak after a moment of just holding me there. The words he spoke scared me so bad, but now I only remember part of what he said, and I wish I didn't. Hey, where are you going? He spoke, almost passive-aggressively. Oh, I have to go. My mom is waiting for me, I stuttered. Okay. He sounded defeated and began to let me go. Before I could break away, he held me tighter again. Tighter than before. Wait. I have a dog, you know? He had that stupid grin on his face again. That scary grin. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and you should come with me. You can play with him. He encouraged. The scary thing is, I almost went with him at that moment. The next maybe 8 minutes felt like hours as he let me go and pulled me back hard into him. His scruffy beard and soft dirty coat brushed against me. The details make my head hurt to remember, but he kept telling me no, almost ordering me to go with him. Finally, he seemed to snap. Alright, you're coming with me. What? I need my mom. I have her keys and she's waiting for me, please. That was still my priority, her keys and the mail. Nope, you're coming with me now. He opened the door and began to pull me out. In a moment of his weakness, I broke away, running to my mom in her car. I slammed the door shut, scaring my brother and my mother. I began shaking and crying, dropping the mail on the car floor. I shakily picked it up and handed everything to my mom as she demanded to know what had happened. I told her everything and she looked pissed. I was so glad she was on my side. I looked outside, tears still streaming down my face, and noticed the man looked at me through the car window from the top ramp of the building. I began to cry harder, in panic as he started coming over. My mom stopped me as she noticed him coming. What was her reason for thinking he was completely harmless? He fell at the bottom of the ramp. He tripped. My mom laughed at the creep and started driving away. While she tried to comfort me, saying things like, he was just harmless old drunk man, and he didn't hurt you. Now years later, I brought it up to my dad when I was at his house. My parents divorced 3 years after this incident. Thinking he knew, my mom never told him. He was angry, but I calmed him down. He was pissed my mom didn't come for me sooner, and that she hadn't done more. I told him not to confront my mom on this, and he agreed. But not long after telling my dad, I brought it up to my mom. My mom said I was being a drama queen, that I would never get hurt, and that he never tried anything. I was furious. But now I don't know if I should be. I mean, I know drunk slurring, but this was almost spiteful, and his tone demanding. My questions I'll leave off with are, what were his intentions, and am I right to be mad? Either way, creepy old guy who scared me, and makes me still hate others touching me. Let's not meet again. This happened to me about a month ago. Some context. I'm a woman in my mid-20s who lives alone in a cozy flat in the attic area of an old Victorian building, up in the old servants' quarters where I belong. The design of the roof hanging over my window and the high driveway walls means that I get some interesting acoustics. During the quiet night time, the sounds bounce up from the whole long street, even from out of sight. I can hear the footsteps and conversations of passerbys as crystal clear as if they were in the room with me. Yet standing on the drive, you can't hear them at all. It was almost 4 a.m. and pitch dark outside. I had been finding it hard to sleep properly the last few nights. So, I was still up and pottering around in my PJs with the lights on. I had the window cracked and the blinds half open to get some fresh air in. I usually keep them closed. If I have a light on at night, you can see right up into them from the streets and houses across, which I sadly did not realize for my first couple of months here. Sorry neighbors if you saw me dancing and cooking my underwear. However, I was so flustered from not getting to sleep and desperate for air, I thought everybody else would be snoozing. I had done the same the previous 3 or 4 sleepless nights. I had just made some tea and settled down to read a book when I heard my door buzzer ringing. I remembered thinking it was odd that I had not heard anybody approaching, as I was just sat by my window, but I brushed it off as being sleep deprived. Nobody who visits me ever rings my door buzzer. They call my phone. So I grabbed my phone to check if I had missed some of my friends or family. Nope, nothing. I had run to the window to look down at the porch, but unfortunately I could only see the steps leading up to it. The motion sensor light was on, and I could hear a strange scuffling noise. Then some thuds. I figured somebody had called the wrong flat by mistake and was probably drunkenly stumbling around. Even with my rational explanation, a strange sense of unease overwhelmed me. I felt on edge after I heard the thuds and turned my lights off so I could grab through the blinds without being seen, but unfortunately couldn't see much. After a few minutes the noises stopped and the motion sensor's lights turned off, although I didn't see anybody come back down the steps. I figured I'd either missed them in the dark or the person they were looking for had let them in. After 20 minutes or so, I relaxed and turned my lamp back on to potter around again. About a minute later, my buzzer rang again. This time it was ringing repeatedly, as if someone was aggressively holding the button down. I froze and stared at it for a while, unsure what to do. I was starting to get annoyed, and I began to worry that it might actually be someone I knew who needed help. Why else would they be ringing my door past 4 a.m. in the morning? I plucked up my courage to answer, albeit with a shaky hand. Hello? No reply. I can hear somebody breathing heavily through my phone static. It sounds like a man. Who is this? What do you want? Again, no reply. Just heavy breathing. I hung up, thinking they got the wrong flat or the telephone was playing up again. I stayed by the wall phone for a few moments, staring at it, unsure what to do. The buzzer went off loudly again, and I about jumped out of my skin as I was so tense. Who is this? Why do you keep calling me? All I can hear is static again, thinking I was getting knocked down gingered. Ding dong ditch for my US friends across the big pond. I went to hang up the phone again. Just before I did, I could hear a muffled voice, and I whipped the phone back to my ear and demanded to know who it was. What was that? Let me in. Huh? Who are you? Let me in, please. Please? His voice started breaking into a panic. I'm not letting you in. You haven't said who you are. There's people coming to get me. They tried to jump me and I ran away. I'm not safe out here. Please, you've got to let me in. Let me in. Help me, please. Immediately, I noped the fuck out and hung up on the wall phone. There was no way I was letting a strange man into my building who wouldn't identify himself, especially as I had to leave the safety of my locked flat to physically go down to the front porch to open it. My gut told me that his story was complete bullshit, but on the off chance that it was true, I was worried there was about to be a crazy fight on my driveway. I grabbed my mobile phone and dialed 999 as I ran to turn my lights off and shut the blinds again, peeked out through a crack. The man had been ringing my buzzer non-stop since I hung up, but shortly after I turned the lights out, it stopped again. The weird shuffling and thumping noises on the porch started up again as I explained the situation to the emergency operator on the phone. She urged me to stay calm and stay on the phone with her, and said that the police were already aware something was happening. Somebody else in my building had called earlier to say a man had been trying to break in the front door after trying all the ground floor windows down the slide and back. They had a similar call a few nights before too. That explains the weird noises I kept hearing, and why I didn't hear him approach from the street at the front. The noises had now stopped, but I was beginning to panic. Hard. I asked the lady when the police would arrive. She said they would send out a unit as soon as one was available. Yay, recent cuts to police funding. And to stay locked inside. After 10 minutes of no activity outside and the motion lights turning off, the lady said to stay in my flat with the door locked. Sure, like I'm going to do anything else. And to call back if he reappeared, and they'd escalate it to their end if he made it into the building, and she ended the call. I sat by the window watching, and sure enough, a few minutes later, the noises started again and the lights below came on. I don't think he ever left. Or even went down to the side of the car park at the back. I still couldn't see what was going on because of the angle from my window. I was about to call the police again when a taxi driver passing by slammed on his brakes and shouted out his window. I stopped to listen. Hey you, what are you doing over there? I dropped you off on the other side of town an hour ago. The taxi driver knew this man. What a twist. Oh hey, I lost my keys. My friends live here and I'm trying to get a hold of them to let me in. I see the shoulder and leg of the man around the corner slightly. You told me you were going home to sleep it off and wouldn't be causing any more trouble like earlier. I asked you to get out of here and you begged me to drop you home still. So I did, and now you're not at home. I just said I have no keys to get in. I'm trying to stay with my friends. They live here. You could hear that the man was getting agitated, and that edge was creeping into his tone as he lied again. Taxi driver. So why are you sulking down the side there, making a ruckus instead of ringing the bell? What's going on? What are you really doing? The man gets angry at this and storms down the driveway to confront the taxi driver. This is my first time getting a proper look at him. Although I can only see the back of him, he looked like a normal, well-presented young man with brown hair, black t-shirt, jeans, and trainers. I was surprised. Based on his appearance, he would not be someone I would normally think to avoid late at night. I couldn't really make out what was said next as they were both shouting over each other, but I could hear the taxi driver yell, "Police!" and the man suddenly leapt towards his car door. The taxi driver quickly screeched off down the road, leaving the man standing there swearing and seething. It was at this point I'd realized I had been an idiot, frozen by the window watching the scene unfurl beneath me without calling the police to let them know he was back. I ducked down to pick up my phone, which I must have dropped amidst the commotion. As I spoke to a different operator, the man turned around and strolled down the driveway a little bit, but seemed to hesitate and stop. Staring at my building, I tried to get a good look at his face, but it was too dark to make out much detail. He stood like this for almost 10 minutes, just standing there and staring up at my window, occasionally swaying from side to side. I knew rationally that he couldn't see me peeking out, but I could swear he was just staring right at me, and knew I was there. He stopped looking at my window and turned to stare at the door for a few moments. I was begging the emergency operator to get the police out here sooner, as I was worried he was going to try the door again. However, I think the confrontation with the taxi driver made him lose his nerve, as he was worried about police showing up. I could hear him make an odd huffing, sorting noise in frustration as he left my driveway, slowly walking down the street and out of sight. I updated the emergency operator with the directions he headed off in and ended the call. About 10 minutes later, I saw a police car cruise by with its headlights off, heading the way he'd gone. Unsurprisingly, they never found him, as it had been too long and there were too many side streets and alleyways for him to slip away down. He didn't come back again, but I stayed vigilant by the window until sunrise, crying my little eyes out and chain smoking like hell. I didn't sleep properly for weeks afterwards, and I get extremely paranoid walking to and from my building now. I've stopped taking the bins down if the sun is even slightly setting. Luckily, I had already begun the process to move elsewhere for unrelated reasons. So, I only have to live here for a couple more weeks before I move to a big house with friends. I liked living on my own before this. Now I'm very grateful to be losing my privacy to have some backup. Shout out to the brave taxi driver who stopped to confront him. You were more helpful than local police, and I don't know if he would have left if you had not scared him off. I wish I could have asked you what the hell happened when you met that man earlier that night. So strange man, trying to trick me into thinking you were in danger so I would let you in. Let's never, ever meet. So, this happened to me on Thursday, April 25th, and I still can't shake off how terrifying and strange it was. So, I was home alone, getting ready for my 12 o'clock college class that morning, and I opened my blinds to let some natural light in. I glanced at my window to see a man in his mid-30s wearing a baseball cap roaming around my property, with his hands on his hips, walking with a lot of weird confidence. Our yard is kind of like a cliff, and it looks over our 5 acres of property down below. I live in the P&W, so it's a pretty scenic view. I was really confused and thought maybe it was a worker that my mom had hired for our renovations on the house, admiring the view. I'm a little bit uncomfortable at this point because the dude walks to the side of my house out of sight. I head upstairs to see him now roaming around my front yard and my driveway, looking at things, checking out my house, etc. He still hasn't seen me at this point. I call my dad and ask him if we have hired anyone to come by the house, and he says not that he knows of, and tells me he's going to call my mom and ask her, and then call me back. I'm waiting for the call when I notice a strange dude's car. It's a white Honda with no license plates, just parked parallel to my front door. This dude still hasn't seen me, and he's still wandering around, so I take this as an opportunity to remember that I have a security system, and I armed it, so if he did try to break in, it would immediately alert the police. If this was some sort of professional or worker, he would have to ring my doorbell, or knock at least once. He did neither. Just then, I get a call back from my dad saying neither him or my mom hired anyone to come by today, and that I needed to call our local police station immediately. I went back downstairs after making sure to lock every door and window upstairs and called my city's police station. I explained to a woman on the other end what had happened, and she decided she's not going to send out an officer out, and instead gave me a number to call their emergency dispatch line and told me to talk to them. I call the number she gave me, and immediately I get an automated message saying, "Thank you for calling my town's name, non-emergency hotline. Nobody is available to take your call right now. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. At this point, I'm really irritated because 15 minutes have passed and this weird dude is still lurking around my house while I'm home alone, and apparently that wasn't enough to warrant an emergency to the lady I called at the local police department. I hung up and decided to call 911. After getting in touch with the 911 operator, I was asked a series of questions about his appearance before they were even alert officers near me to start heading towards my house. The whole thing seemed really weird. Nobody was in a hurry to have officers come up to my place when I was a younger girl and home alone with a strange dude. I asked the officer if I could stay on the line with her, when finally, after what seemed like forever, alerted the police to come to where I was, and she agreed, and I went back upstairs to check on the weird guy. And he's now sitting in his unplated Honda, either listening to the radio show extremely loud or on a phone call with someone through the car. It was a very prominent loud male voice coming from his car. Then all of a sudden, I hear the tone you hear when someone hangs up on you, and the operator was no longer on the line.
I was really confused when my thoughts were interrupted by an unrecognized phone number calling me. I assumed it was the operator calling me back, so I picked it up. Instead, I was greeted by really creepy, heavy breathing. I'm not sure who it was, but it really freaked me out. I hung up immediately and dialed back 911. I had been pretty calm to this point, but the phone call had put me in a panic mode. I got on the phone with another operator who already knew my situation and address before I even could explain it to her. She said the cops were on their way. 20 minutes had passed at this point. The dude is still in his car, and the cops aren't. Keep in mind I live in a smaller town, so there's no reason why it took the cops so long as it did to come down. Finally, this dude is leaving my driveway right as the cops pull in, and they stop him and ask him a few questions. A cop then comes to my door and hands me a sketchy looking flyer saying it was just a landscaper. He said he had an appointment. I was really relieved and irritated that it was just a dude my mom had hired, until I realized it wasn't. I called my mom back and said the cops said it was just a landscaper that you hired, and that he had an appointment. My mom replies with, I can assure you we never hire a landscaper. We don't even need one. So, creepy dude, who could potentially be posing as a landscaper to traffic people or rob their houses, let's not meet. I'm not sure if this story belongs here, but I can still remember this day like it was yesterday. My mother's words clinging to my eardrums like plastic wrap on leftover plate. I need you and your friends to be extra careful. There'd been reports of a white truck following little girls home. If you see your friends walking alone, don't let them. You walk with them until they get there, and do not leave them until they reach their front door. To ease her worry, I began walking with everyone to school and back home. It took me longer to get home, but I had the safest location on my street. At that time, my house could see into all surrounding parks and school grounds and sat on the top of a hill. It was next door to both the mayor of the housing authority and the SFC, Sergeant First Class of the military police. I did the same routine every day. Go across the street, through the two houses, and to the sidewalk. Go through an alleyway until I reached Tank Destroyer Trail. Walked half a mile to the concrete bridge that goes over the street, and finally down the other side to the school side doors. Reverse order. Repeat every year for 3 years. My mother was a drill sergeant, and until that morning I had never really taken her word seriously. I remember telling her, "We live on a military base, Mom. There's no way I'll go missing. Or besides, I'll scream." It's summer in Central Texas, it's a blistering hot day, and summer school had been dismissed early. Me and a few of my friends are walking home together, but today is eerily quiet between us. My gut is buzzing like an angry hive the further away we got from school. For whatever reason, I felt like I was being watched. I do a scan of the area and notice there is no other students around but myself, Aubrey, Ashley, and Amber. Nothing is being said as we get halfway across the bridge, so I break the silence and ask if they're okay. Ashley responds, "My mom and dad have been warning me about this truck that's following kids home." Aubrey chimes in, "Mine too. I think they're just doing that to scare us." "But why?" I ask. "What purpose would that serve them to do that? Maybe keep tabs on us?" Aubrey replied, looking at her phone. Aubrey's dad was a bit of a control freak, but I doubt even he would have done something that drastic to control her. If that was the case, then there would be no need for all of our parents to warn us. "Well, I'm gonna go home this way today," Ashley says as she starts to take a different route home. "What about the truck?" Amber grabs Ashley's hand and grips it tightly. "You need to stay with us." I look over at Aubrey, who's walking a bit faster down the trail. I can hear the fear in her voice. "I'm getting out of here before something bad happens." My hair practically jumps off my body hearing her say those words. All of the danger bells and whistles are going off so loudly that I can barely hear myself talk. "Ashley, at least let us walk you there," I plead. She reluctantly agrees and comes back to the trail with us. Aubrey is a good length ahead of us, so we yell for her to slow down. She turns around and I can see the whites of her eyes. I turn just slightly to my right, and from the corner of my eye, there's an all-white truck, no license plate, in a tinted front window, so you couldn't see the driver. It was slowly driving by the curb on the main road, and it was definitely following us. There were no other cars around, and that made it all the more creepy. I stopped walking and looked straight at the truck. I tried to see if I could make out any distinctive marks. a make or model, but it didn't even have a brand on it. Ford, Chevy, Nissan, no grill emblem at all. My friend stopped, and then we all stared. Whoever was in the driver's seat was certainly looking back at us. All of us held our breaths and waited for it to leave. It didn't. My every sense was telling me to run. My gut was telling me to run. My fight or flight was only flight at that point. I already knew what was going to come next. I placed my leg behind me as I could take a step back. It's going to chase us. We need to run. Before the others could respond, the engine of the truck roared like a lion. The front tires jumped the curb, and the truck came barreling down the trail. That half a mile seemed to take forever to run down. We bolted down the trail as fast as we could. It definitely was gaining on us. We get to the end of the trail and stopped at the sidewalk that's by my neighborhood street. It was still chasing us. We all shouted and screamed. Abby tried to grab her cell phone and dial 911, but dropped it as we were running. Where was everyone? How is no one hearing us cry out? Besides all these houses, whose backyards led to the walking trail? How is it even possible? Is no one seeing this? Can no one hear us? I tell them all to follow me to my house, and when we finally get there, my front door is locked and I don't have my house key. We immediately go next door to the MP officer's house and begin hurling our fists at the door screaming for help. The officer isn't home, but his wife is. She opens the door and we frantically get inside. We force her out of the way as we all run inside and we slam the door shut. Miss Janet is asking us all kinds of questions, but we want her to be quiet. Sorry again, Miss Janet. We don't even make it to the couch. We all stand by the door and try to stay away from the windows. We hear the truck bye-bye and decide no one leaves until Miss Janet's husband comes home. Just thinking about it as I'm typing this makes my stomach hurt. 11 years later. Even now, I find myself gasping for air. My mouth dries out and my neck stings as if hot needles are being forced down my esophagus. When he comes home, make formal police reports and tell our parents, our teachers, and other students about the incident, but we never heard any other updates on the truck. From then on, teachers were on every post of the trail for kids walking home from school. MPs were and still are posted on every corner within a 2-mile radius of the school. So, to the creepy white truck, I'm elated to say, let's not meet again. Freshman year, I started a video club that was basically centered around creating and discussing original content for YouTube videos. Since I established it, I was neutrally president and my friend Pete was vice president because he knew a lot about making videos. One day, Pete brings in a couple of other guys who are his friends, Bo, Matt, and of course, John. Fast forward to the summer, and we're all exchanging emails and keep in touch through Facebook. Later that same week, I got a message from both Pete and Matt at the same time, asking if I was at all interested in John romantically. I was super taken back at this because I had no idea that John liked me, like at all. He was always shy and hardly ever started a conversation with me. I said I wasn't allowed to date yet, so it didn't even matter. Flash forward to November of my sophomore year. John had asked me to both homecoming and snowball, a winter formal. I had turned him down both times, gently. Things would start getting weird when he would show up to class that I would be in. Like, he would walk in. This happens most often during English and Latin because he knew both of the teachers well and they let him sit in. He would sit next to me and try to talk to me. After school let out, I would immediately get emails from him, long ones, asking me about my day and other stuff like that. I never replied. Obviously, at this point, I was getting uncomfortable with his constant presence. I tried telling him this, but he didn't seem to get it. Not knowing what else to do, I started trying to distance myself from him. It got to the point where he was outside every single one of my classes after they ended so that he could talk to me. I had friends escort me to and from classes to sweep me away from him. Then, the day before winter break, John gave me a note. I didn't think anything of it. I shoved it in my backpack without thinking. I read it later at rehearsal. I did theater. Nothing could have prepared me for what it contained. It was a bit like this. I hate you. I do not say these words lightly. If you hated me, you could have just told me. I wasted my friendship on you. I thought you were beautiful and smart, but you're just a bitch. A bitch that makes me feel worthless, that makes me want to die. You're the reason why I want to kill myself. If I do so, know that it'll be your fault alone. I'm more depressed than I've ever been in years because of you. What the fuck is your problem? Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the first or worst hate note he sent me. The others came after I got my first boyfriend, after I kissed a boy in front of him, and when I got him kicked out of English class that I was in where he would visit me. Even after all this ugliness, he asked me to the senior prom. The audacity. Things only got worse from there. He manipulated mutual friends into thinking I was the bad guy. He started talking shit about me behind my back, and I caught him doing it twice. And like the coward he is, he immediately shrank from me when I caught him. Those mutual friends tried to explain that John didn't get social cues and that he's socially awkward and that I should let it go. And like an idiot, I did. I didn't report him to any teachers. Everything came to a head the last day of May that year. It was the official last day for seniors. I walked into the pre-class hangout room. It was our theater's director's classroom, and everyone said their good mornings there. John was there, and given everything that had happened, I decided to ignore him. When he saw me come in, he made a beeline for me. The room was so crowded, I wasn't able to physically avoid him. He shoved me into the wall behind the door. I fell to the ground, my head smacked against the open door. I was disoriented, but I distinctly remember him saying, "Little bitch," before walking out of the room. I burst into tears of frustration and exhaustion. Those in my immediate vicinity saw what happened and got me to calm down. After that, word got out about John was actually an asshole. I still didn't report him, but I wish I did. John, let's never meet again. I was walking my boyfriend's dogs about a month ago on some trail near the beach. His dogs were both mutts, one husky / chow, other one pit bull / hippo. I think they're both sweet, loving, social, and completely chill. This particular trail leads to an estuary and starts in the state park, but there are only 2 parking spots at the trailhead, so it's nearly always deserted when I'm there. There is basically a maintained trail that goes to the estuary, and then there's an unofficial trail that loops off the actual trail. It is hard to spot and largely overgrown, but I can tell I'm not the only one who uses it. I was walking the dogs in the main trail, and just to get to the estuary, where we typically stop to watch the birds for a bit, when one of the dogs, the husky, started making a low growl and puffed a full mohawk. We live in an area with cougars and bears, so that's the first place my mind went. I drew my pistol. I'm a redneck and a hunter, and I'm usually carrying, just in case, and started backing up the trail. I'd only taken a few steps, dragging the husky, still growling scarily, away. Pitt was still clueless and was watching us grow dopily when a creepy motherfucker, henceforth known as STMF, stepped out from behind a tree. He wasn't scary looking, just the typical REI, outdoorsy looking type that frequented the craft breweries on every corner here in Washington. He was maybe late 40s, early 50s. The tree he was behind wasn't huge. He would have had to position himself deliberately to hide behind it. When I was approaching, he started walking towards me, smiling at the growling, pissed-off dogs like it was a bunny rabbit talking to him in a soothing voice with his hand out like he was going to pet him. The dog barked loudly and continued to growl in an unfamiliar and terrifying way. At this point, my Pit finally got the act together and looked away from her new squirrel friend. She took in the scene and got in behind the guy and me. Immediately, she didn't puff or growl. Honestly, I don't know if she knows how. She's such a teddy bear. But her tail was out at a weird angle, and she bared her teeth at him. Now, I don't know if it was her threatening looks or if the creepy motherfucker had caught a glimpse of my gun that I was holding down by my side, but he suddenly dropped the Ambler hiker facade and gave me this look that just made my skin crawl. It was pure evil. He didn't move a step after that, and didn't say anything else. It was just creepy as fuck. I said something along the lines of, "Don't fucking come near me," and we left quickly. This time I made sure he saw my gun as I turned around. When I got to the part of the trail that loops off, I took it after checking to see if creepy motherfucker was in sight. The dogs were still super tense and on alert, and I eventually slowed down so I could listen, and also because I'm a fat ass and was about to pass out from exertion. The loop meanders wide around the trail and is probably 1/4 mile or so longer than the main path, which itself is maybe about a mile. When I was nearing the point that the loop hit the main trail again, my good boy started to growl again. It was super low, and thankfully the creeper didn't hear it. He was on the main trail heading back towards the estuary. As soon as he was out of sight, we booked it to the last 100 yards or so of the trail ahead. The Subaru I'd parked next to had its hatch open. It hadn't been open when I got there. I tried to see the license plate but couldn't since it was on the hatch. I wasn't willing to take a second look to pull it down and look. I basically threw my pit in the back of my Jeep. She's 90 pounds with the physique of a small hippo, as previously noted. So I'm pretty proud of that, and my other dog hopped up with her. I jumped in and took off, and right when I turned onto the road, my pit barked. That was the first and only time in 6 months of knowing her that she had ever barked. My best guess of what happened is that as soon as I was out of sight, creepy motherfucker started to follow me, and I didn't know about the other trail. He got to the trailhead ahead of me since the trail was shorter, and saw my Jeep was still there, so he opened his hatch for reasons that just can't have been good, and headed back down the path to find me. When he heard my door close, he raced back to the trailhead. My very, very good girl told him what she thought of him. I swear that bark sounded like a combination of all the dirtiest swear words I know and several I don't. It was off season, so the state park was barely manned, if at all, by rangers. As soon as I got back to the road where the cell signal, I called my brother, who is a cop in the town, Park Borders. He wasn't on shift and it took a while for anyone to get out there, but by the time they did, creepy motherfucker was gone. Creepy motherfucker, you had better hope we don't meet again. If you ever attempt that bullshit with another woman, she may also have a scary dog and a full-size pistol to show you the errors in your ways. My stepdogs are trying to protect me, but inadvertently protected you by giving me a way to get away without having to resort to drastic measures. With or without the dogs, you will not get away unscathed next time. So for your sake, let's not meet again.
I have a lot of weird encounters outside my office on my smoke breaks, but I think this one takes the cake, even with how anticlimactic it was. Today I was sitting on the wall outside my building smoking and messing around on my phone. I had probably been sitting there for about 2 minutes without looking up. When I finally do, I notice a guy on the corner about 20 feet away staring intently at me. He's hunched over, facing me in the classic zombie pose, wearing a large coat, a surgical mask, and gloves. I don't know how long he'd been standing there, but it was daytime and the area is relatively populated, so despite being the only people on the street, I wasn't too worried. I went back to looking at my phone, but kept discreetly glancing in his direction to see if he was still there. He didn't move or stop looking at me for probably a minute and a half, just sunken shoulders with his unblinking eyes pointed directly at me over his mask. Finally, I noticed an older man walking towards us, and my cigarette is almost finished, so I assume worst comes to worst, this guy will be near if anything happens. I glance back at my phone and hear what I assume are the older man's footsteps approaching. Before I have a chance to look up, the surgical zombie is sitting within an inch of me on the wall. I'm a polite girl, so I give him a vague smile, while my inner self and personal space are screaming at me to get up and leave. He asks me for a cigarette, so I give him one, and he just continues to sit there with it unlit. I can't fight my manners, so I ask him if he needs a light, and he gives me a gloved double thumbs up and stares at me. I ask him if that means he had one, to which he responds with another double thumbs up. I assume that was him saying he did, so I turn my back to my phone, planning on taking one more drag before getting up to leave. He then says, "Yes, I need one." So I give him my lighter, he hands it back, and I put my smoke out and stand up. He then begins laughing, like full belly laughing. I didn't really know how to respond, so I tell him to have a nice day and walk into my building. To be honest, I've never really had a fear of people, and I can't say this is the first time I've had someone has done something like this, but the mask and gloves really added to the absurdity of the situation. It's Friday night, at around 8:45 p.m. The little one's in bed and I'm chilling with some friends online, gaming. There's a loud bang and I'm instantly freaked out due to having my home, my safe place, invaded by some creeper twice in the past 3 months. I turned the volume on my computer down, trying my best to come up with excuses. Oh, it was the neighbors doing something. Who's in their right mind would try to break into my house when they can see that I'm awake? Front outdoor light on, lounge lit on. It's quiet for a while, so I return to playing the game and talking to my friends. That's when I hear rustling. I think it's coming from the game, despite the volume being super low, but to be on the safe side, I turn the volume on the computer off completely. The rustling's still there. At this point, I think it might be that annoying pest possum. The banging could have been it jumping onto the garbage roof, and now it was scuffling around outside the leaves, searching for some food. As I said earlier, who would try to trespass when they could clearly see someone was home? If they did trespass, why would they be doing it so loudly? I want to say it put me at ease, but it didn't. Fast forward half an hour and the noises have stopped, and my cat's begging me to let outside. Little bastard. I love him, really. I hate opening doors, curtains, windows at night. Paranoia at its finest. But tonight I had some reason to be paranoid. At least I kept the chain lock on the door and let the fat fuzzball squeeze out, and had a peek through the crack, seeing if anything was amiss on the front lawn. Nothing out of the ordinary, so I locked the door and head back to the lounge. 5 minutes later, someone tries the door handle. Finding it locked, I hear a laugh and they start scratching on the glass as I frantically grab my phone and call the police. Whoever it was that had left by the time they answered the phone, the police couldn't find evidence that anyone had been on the property. They did a sweep of the neighborhood, but couldn't find anyone on the street either. Whoever you are, I'd say let's not meet, but I'm pretty sure you're the same person who came the other 2 times. And I'm fairly certain that the person is my ex. So, Mr. X, if it is you, smile for the cameras next time you come around. They just arrived in my mailbox. I've stalked this sub for a while, and couldn't decide whether or not to post mine, but I'm feeling brave on a Monday. It was a very long time ago, back in 1973. I know it was summer, I was 6, and we were living on Monica Lane in Madison, Wisconsin. Thing is, I sort of recalled it, but never put 2 and 2 together until a few months ago, when I was talking to my mom, who went into the great detail. I was a very gregarious child, outgoing, extroverted, friends, play with anyone. It was at the time a middle-class neighborhood, and 3 houses down from ours on the same side of the street was a huge park. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a salesman, but mom worked second shift at Marriott, while my dad worked days. I rarely had a babysitter, only if they went out for dinner or a movie, but they did go out often and there were always older kids in the neighborhood to babysit. One sitter who I really liked lived a few blocks or so away, and down the street a little bit. Vicky had babysat a few times before that, and it was very uneventful. She played games with me, and do my hair, play dress up, pretty basic stuff. So anyhow, one day I had gone with friends down to the park. I remember there was a ball field at the time, and the sandlot next to the field. My friends wanted to play in the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. I looked at the sandbox and my babysitter Vicky was standing there. I told my friends I was going down to the sandbox and I ran off. We played in the sand, building a castle, and then she asked if I wanted to go get something cold to drink. It was stifling hot, and of course I said yes. So she takes my hand and we started walking to her place. She starts telling me about her puppies and asking if I want to play with them. Of course I get giddy and now I can't wait to get to her house. This was where my memory had stopped, and after my mom told me what happened, the rest of it flooded back. My mother just happened to be talking to my sister about some of the places we lived, and we got to Monica Lane. I told her I remember the park and how big it seemed, and she asked if I remember being kidnapped. I immediately thought she was kidding, and then look on her face told me otherwise. She said it was around 5 in the afternoon, and one of my friends had come to the door to ask me to come back outside. Sure that I had gotten bored and walked back home. When my mom checked the house, she realized I wasn't there. 7 months pregnant with my sister, sprints to the park screaming my name. After asking several kids if they had seen me with no clue, she went to the ball field and asked the older boys if they had seen me. One of the boys, she guessed around 14, said she had seen a younger woman playing with a girl that fit my description in the sand and walked off in a general direction. That was all she knew. My mom ran across the street to one of the houses and asked to use their phone to call the police. By the time the police got there, my dad had come home and some of the neighbors were trying to help my mom. So there's this search party out looking for me, screaming my name and knocking on doors. The police had gone back to the park to ask the boys if they knew who had been with me and if they knew who she was. Between the boys and the neighbors, they had deducted who it was and had led me off. But I have no idea how, honestly. The police and the entourage go to her home. She lived with her parents, but they weren't home, and knock on the door. She came to the door and told them she hadn't seen me and that she'd been home all day. The police asked to come in, and for some reason she said okay. They went through the house and went to the basement and found me. That's what my mom knew, and then I remembered. It was literally like a floodgate had opened, and I started crying. At 6, you sort of trust everyone, and she'd been in our home. I've never got a bad feeling from her, and my parents didn't either. But when we walked into her house, I remember that cold, holy fuck feeling washing over me and getting very worried. I remember starting to cry and saying I wanted to go home over and over. She takes me into her kitchen and gets me a glass of water and a tissue. I hear her dogs barking, and next to the kitchen is an open stairway that goes down, and where the barking was coming from. She starts trying to cajole me into going downstairs, telling me there's all sorts of toys and games. I reluctantly agree, and she grabs my hand and heads downstairs. The dogs are going nuttier, and I start screaming. At this point, Vicky is getting fucking bizarre. She screams at me to shut the fuck up. If you don't shut up, I will throw you in the cage with the dogs, and they will eat you. Shut up. Dragging me down the stairs and still screaming. I was scared out of my mind. I remember crying so hard I was hyperventilating, and I'm screaming so hard I'm not making sounds. Vicky then flips a switch and starts being syrupy sweet. Trying to calm me down, she tells me that she was just playing a game and tells me she wants to play hide and seek. She must have been relatively skilled at calming me down, because the next thing I know, I hear knocking on the door upstairs, and I wasn't crying. The house were all the same sort of tract house that Sears used to sell, not huge but not small, but you could hear everything at any spot in the house. I kept hearing the knocking, and she tells me that it's her friends. They're coming to play hide and seek. She's convinced me to let her put a piece of masking tape over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, and lifted me into the big wooden box next to the kennel. She put a big pile of blankets over me and told me to be really quiet so they didn't find me. The whole time the dogs were going batshit, but when she calmed me down, they calmed down too. They still looked incredibly mean, but they were no longer frothing at the mouth and only slightly growling until the knocking started. I remember scrunching in there, confused, still scared and convinced that the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I was crying again and hyperventilating. I remember taking the tape off my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but remember I needed to be quiet because I was afraid what she'd do if I screamed. I laid in that smelly box next to a big bag of dog food, sweating to hell, tears rolling down my face. I sort of pushed the blankets to the side, but only enough that I could pull them back over me when someone came. I recall thinking about my dad and wondering if he'd come find me. All of a sudden I hear what sounds like adults yelling my name. They come down the stairs and the dogs are going batshit again. Over and over men are yelling my name, and then I hear a man say, "If you don't shut those fucking dogs up, I will." I was in a large storage box, like a carpenter's toolbox type of thing, with tape hanging off my mouth. When they opened the lid, I remember a very nice man asking me my name and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in any other than screams and tears and grabbing his neck so hard my dad had to pry me off. I remember my parents taking me to the hospital to be checked out, and that's all I really remember. Mom said that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and last she knew was in prison, but couldn't remember when the last time she had heard anything. We moved from that area shortly thereafter, and I haven't been back since. I do know that my mom said that her parents were odd, and they didn't know them. She had met Vicky from neighbors that had used her as a babysitter, and had never heard anything bad, and that always seemed happy with her. She lived in a general neighborhood, but it would have been 2 blocks over, and 1 block down. Mom said they never picked her up. She always walked over. When they'd get home, they'd drive her home, but never noticed anything out of the ordinary. Mom and Dad had only met her parents when they came to the door to ask for forgiveness, that Vicky hadn't meant to do anything bad, and was a good girl. Mom said my dad picked her up by the shirt and told him that if they ever came to the property again, he'd kill them. I remember her name and sort of what she looked like, but would have no idea if she walked up to me who she is. The other day at work, we were basically told to look out for ourselves and others, wait for security guard, etc. Now this was a normal thing for the suburb we lived in, but it was still a bit strange. My friends from Nightville told me why. Their friend and coworker finished up around 12 that morning and was approached by this guy when he was in his car. The guy looked pretty normal, track keys and all, and gave him an envelope claiming there were free Fringe tickets inside. Side note for clarification, Fringe is an art festival like music and comedy and dancing, etc. in the CBD. There was some sort of white powder on the tickets, but he just assumed it was cocaine or something. Again, not uncommon in this area, so just grabbed it, planning to throw it out later because it was probably counterfeit. Not wanting to spark any conflict, it's unpredictable around here, especially around 12 a.m. His mate came out and around 12:15 to see him with something like burns on his hands, where he touched the powder. He felt like he was burning on the inside and couldn't breathe properly. Luckily, he was still conscious and told him to take him to the hospital, which luckily wasn't that far away. They got there, and practically everyone that came into contact with him felt like they were burning under the skin, and were all having breathing difficulties within minutes. They had to call hazmat, fireys, and everyone was decontaminated. Luckily, everyone is okay. Around 9 p.m., I heard the telltale rumble that meant the forecast storm was about to start. I couldn't recall if I had rolled up my car window when I got home, so I went out to check. It was already dark out, and I live in a part of town that isn't big on streetlights, so at night sometimes it's hard to even stay on the sidewalk without crashing into bushes. The dumpsters are about 200 to 300 feet from my car, on our U-shaped street, tucked into a corner that backs into trees and a small creek. I live on the back of the building, so once I round the corner, you can't see me from my car nor the dumpsters. I got out to my car. As I rounded that corner, I could see what looked like a flashlight in the dumpster. Weird, but not alarming, as there are a lot of teenagers and younger boys who fuck around in that corner of the parking lot. My window was down a bit. As I rolled it up, I hear a clattering sound from the dumpsters. I turned to see someone climbing out of the dumpsters and start shining the light in the other dumpsters. My daughter had left her window down too, so I walked around to her door and rolled up her window too. I slammed the door shut a bit harder than I meant to, and since I was facing the dumpsters, I could see the dumpster man freeze and swing his light in my direction. He immediately switched it off, and right as I started to walk back inside, he started full-on sprinting towards my direction. My usually sedentary butt has never moved so fast. As I noped back onto the sidewalk and into the back of the building, I quietly opened and shut my door, locked in hopes that with 8 apartments back here, he wouldn't know where I was. Or maybe he was running for reasons entirely unrelated to me. Or maybe he was just fucking with me, and is now having a laugh with his friends about the lady he just scared the shit out of. Whatever it was, I'm sure as shit not getting any sleep tonight. This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife, Alexia, and I had just settled down for the night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We lived in a residential area right outside of town, our home situation right across from the street of the Presbyterian church with a very large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one in particular across the street and downwards a bit, who owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog to ever exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10 p.m. We're laying down watching our film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do except maybe confront our neighbors or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be the neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get up off the couch and decide to walk over to the neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I head outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately I noticed that the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car not there. I decided anyway to walk up to the door and ring the bell. After a minute, no one answering, I gave up and head back towards home. I noticed that Alexia has stepped outside and was looking on towards the direction of the barking. I told her that no one was home and that we should either ignore it or file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day of work or trying to sleep. Alexia and I head back inside for a bit, and finally after about 10 minutes the dog ceases to bark. Alexa and I exhaled and laughed a bit before continuing our film, but of course not long after the dog starts up again. This time it sounded vicious. I got up, went outside and approached our neighbor's fence off backyard and saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me and began to pant in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which he looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's being so loud. I then heard something that sounded like somebody walking through leaves coming from behind me and to the right. I turned to see somebody looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well, as it sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on at the person continuing staring at them in my direction as the dog continued to bark. I looked towards my house where I saw Alexa standing near her car and looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek were stained red with blood, dripping down off his chin, and in his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, and then back at my home. Alexa, who was still outside, yelled to me what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why, the dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexa went inside to grab her phone as I continued to watch on as the person now began to back off. The dog was going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time before someone could reach our home, so I readied myself to go into self-defense as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery towards the woods. When the police finally arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me that seriously, but still investigated the area as I explained to Alexa about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexa and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows, and I decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks, where you'd do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. It was in the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm, cleaning bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy, who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was pretty laid back and was generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot and the work was hard. So one day the temperatures hit around 38 degrees Celsius, around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of the watering hole on the farm about 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax for the hour. So him and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanse with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, however, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. He said, "Do you see that over there? Between those 2 dead trees?" I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red, and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. so you can imagine our surprise when we see a large blue, angular structure far off in the distance. We steered in its direction, and as we got closer, we realized it was a huge blue shipping container just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it there when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go and see what it was. Initially, we pulled off to stop around 100 meters away from it. At this stage, I had really bad feeling. The whole thing wasn't right. It's hard to explain, but if you can imagine seeing such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it had to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I understood given it was his property, but in truth I was really anxious. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side, all motion activated, so they buzzed from side to side following us as we moved around. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along with the lines of, with all this security, someone's obviously doesn't want us here, just let's go. He brushed me off, however, reminding me that it was his farm and whoever put it here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the door. We had some bolt cutters in his toolbox, and after a bit of struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was a rush of cool air. There were flashing LEDs all around the place, and the sort of hum you hear when you hear a hard drive working hard. When I finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges, and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage bins scattered around the far wall, and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of the nonsensical dreams. My heart was racing, and I just wanted to bolt. We had seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they already knew where we were. Jeremy, on the other, was adamant that we get to the bottom of this, so I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it is from a lay position is that it was endless list computer talk. It's like the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked like, just constantly picking up and receiving data, and then recording it in on several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over to the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then, I was pretty sure no one else was there, and there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided against my better judgment to see what was inside all these boxes. My brief shift through the box still makes me feel sick to my stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize it was child pornography. One thing that still gets to me is all neatly ordered in folders and smaller boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled and jumped up and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back in the truck and sped to the house. The farm had no mobile reception, and we hadn't brought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about half an hour from the town closest to the farm. As I mentioned, very remote. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives, and we jumped in them and led them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open, and there was a fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the car, and these did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage had already been done. The arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of computer equipment it described, the only traces of paper and of cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there were no real ways to tell them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first place, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone, area surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up with no real evidence of who might be responsible. The investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy and the shipping container, is still there on the farm. It's too expensive to move.
Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. My friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the road, or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicles disrupting our peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path. That was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long, and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving, and turned into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, the small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud, revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide out in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through, and honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone to patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails. They were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you. Come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now!" and smash a bottle. They had erased any hope that we had that they were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down this series of paths on their vehicles, including the path that we had just came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside the dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he had started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach the farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into a ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained we needed to be picked up right away. He agreed and sped over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of the men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that heard this story. Some think we walked right up into a huge drug deal. Justin and I admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So, I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. Hey.
At the time this took place, I was 12 years old. My parents always kept an eye on me, and my brothers always warned us to stay close to them when we were young, and if anyone ever made us uncomfortable, to tell them straight away. Now, since this encounter, I have been paranoid about keeping myself safe and staying away from creeps. But at that age, I was very shy and quiet. I often hid behind my mom's skirt, and even though I was aware, I felt completely safe and didn't often think about running into people of the hair-raising nature. This encounter changed my way of thinking. I was homeschooled, and my little brother was homeschooled too. My parents went grocery shopping once every week, and my little brother and I accompanied them, mostly to get out of the house and for the opportunity to maybe get some fast food for lunch. One such trip to the shops, we had basically finished filling our trolley with groceries and were ready to pay. Mom had realized that we forgot onions, so I volunteered to go fetch some. As I made my way down the aisle, I saw a dodgy-looking man pass me, but didn't think much of him. I proceeded to the checkout and found the same man making small talk with my dad. I studied him while I got closer to my father. He looked about in his late 60s, with wisps of gray hair coming out of his mostly bald head, glasses, and a large mole under his left eye. I stood next to my dad, and the guy gave me a toothy smile and said something in which I assume was what sounded like French, with the most disgusting breath that I'm pretty sure it killed the flowers behind me, and started staring at my shirt. I didn't get it, but he repeated himself in English. "You like Paris, do you?" He pointed at my shirt, which had the Eiffel Tower printed on it. I guess, but I like this shirt." "Oh, do you? Interesting," he said, but this kept switching glances between my face and my shirt. Suddenly, Dad shoved me out of the exit and hurried me into the parking lot. I didn't understand until my mom came out with my brother in tow. Dad told Mom that there was a weirdo in the store who kept staring at my boobs. Let me note that I didn't look any older than I was. Not that would excuse his actions, but me being young, it made me uncomfortable, and I wasn't a young girl who got catcalled or anything, so I wasn't used to this kind of thing, and this man was old enough to be my grandfather. The next week we went shopping again, on the same day, but at a later time. Parents and little bro made their way to the entrance, and I went to get a trolley from the trolley bay. The shop was in a 2-story building on the 2nd floor, and I looked down to the 1st floor and saw the man directly underneath my position, his back to the wall and smoking. Then he turned to go to the stairs at my left and noticed me standing there. He stared back for a minute. Then he must have recognized me because he got an enormous smile on his face and started up the stairs, at which I hurried inside to find my family. I started down the 1st aisle and was relieved to see my mom at the end of the aisle. Back turned, alas. Before I could reach her, I felt a hand brush against my butt, softly, but I still felt it through my jeans. He passed me and looked me dead in the eye. "Hi, girlie," he whispered, with the same flower-killing breath, before rushing down the next aisle, out of sight. I turned to the next aisle with my mom, and the man was standing shoulder to shoulder with my little brother, 7 at the time. observing him in a predatory manner. My big sister's instincts kicked in, and I bolted to drag my little bro away from the wacko. He still followed us around the store, but kept his distance because my dad was nearby now. I still hadn't told my parents about the man, and when my mom told me to take my little bro to look at the toys, I resisted, but reluctantly agreed after my mom gave me the mum look. As we looked at the toys, I kept my backside facing the baskets/wall, thinking this would not allow him to grope me. As we went to leave the toy section, the man finds us, looking like he had just run a marathon around the shop. He picked out a teddy bear and approached us. "Hi," he said. I told my little bro to run, and was about to follow him when the man full-on cupped my butt and jiggled it. "So soft," he said. I let out a scream and bolted to my dad, bawling. I told him everything, and Dad got extremely enraged. He stormed around the store looking for the sicko, but he had already left. No one was told because I told my parents. I just wanted to go home. In hindsight, we should have told the manager and the police. My advice to young girls and boys is be aware. No matter how safe you feel, someone can still find a way, and if someone tries something, be loud. Make a scene, and people around you are aware. And always tell someone, parents, friends, staff, etc. It took this to make me truly realize my surroundings, and it's horrible. And parents, please keep your kids safe. With creeps like this, you'll never know what they'll do. If I didn't have my parents to protect me, it could have gone down very differently. So, to the sick bastard who thinks it's okay to touch and grab little kids, let's never meet again. This happened around 4 years ago, in middle school, grade 6, around when I was around 10 or 11. Often our schools would do fire drills 3 times a year and 1 lockdown drill, so every student could be prepared for an emergency. That happened around mid-year, when we'd already done our lockdown drills months ago, so when the specific siren went off, I knew it wasn't a drill. At the time, I was in the toilet when the siren started blaring. Of course, I was scared, leaving myself locked in a stall. We were already told if we were in the bathroom, a teacher would come get us and take us to the nearest classroom for safety. I remember counting and waiting a few minutes for whatever teacher that would find me, but none came. I decided to exit the bathroom and walk around the yard a bit. The sirens were still going, so trying to hear for anything wasn't really an option. Although at the front of the school, there was a dirty-looking man. He was leaning on the fence, just staring towards the school, knife in hand. When he noticed me, he waved before entering the school, walking towards me. Of course, I started running away, heading towards the bins and hiding between those. He never found me, but I know he was arrested because my mom brought up the info on him recently and described that he had been watching the school every day in his car, and the reason the school went into lockdown was because they noticed him standing out in front. And the reason why my mom only told me this info recently was because she thought I couldn't handle it back then. This story is from a few years back, when I was in my last year of college. I was taking a history class that I loved, and it just so happened that my good friend, Amelia, was in the class too. Of course, we sat next to one another. The class was taught by a very popular professor, so there were a good deal of people in it. At the time, I was a smoker, as was my friend Amelia, so we made a habit of sharing cigarettes together after class. Around this time, I was starting to befriend another person, Rachel. She and I didn't take any classes together, but she lived with another good friend of mine, so we started to get to know each other, and Rachel and I would do homework together, hang out outside of the library together, on study breaks, and so on. Amelia met Rachel separately, and before long the three of us became a little trio. About a month after we all became friends with Rachel, this boy from Amelia and I's class started saying hello to us during our little cigarette breaks. He would make a little comment here and there about things we were learning in class, and would ask us how we were doing on our papers and such. Eventually we learned his name was Ryan, and Ryan became a fixture in our cigarette ritual. After a little while, Amelia and I noticed that Ryan was asking a lot of questions about our daily schedules. At first we thought he was just trying to get to know us and our interests, but his questions were getting specific. What times did we go to the library? When did we study in places other than the library? Who did we like to study with? He was his normal smiley and friendly self the whole time, but the subject matters of his questions were just off. We thought perhaps he was just a little bit socially awkward. A lot of people at our school, well known for being full eccentric students, were eccentric. It wasn't terribly uncommon to encounter someone who acted a bit differently than the norm. We let it slide. Ryan started asking Amelia and I to hang out outside of class. He wanted to tag along in what we usually did, but Amelia and I were both usually busy at the time, and it kept not working out with our schedules. He kept asking every day after class though, and we noticed he was getting less happy and significantly more irritated as time continued to go on. Amelia and I both agreed that he was starting to make us uncomfortable, though we couldn't quite put our fingers on why. One day Rachel met Amelia and I at her dormitory, saying she had something serious she needed to speak with us about. When we got there, we settled onto a bench and got to talking. Rachel told us that she had recently gotten out of a terribly abusive relationship with a boy who hit her, sexually assaulted her, and took general pleasure in her misery. Around the time we had met Rachel, she had begun the process of reporting him to the campus authorities in an attempt to have him removed from campus. A temporary no-contact order had been put in place between the two of them, and Rachel told us that she had just been moved into the dorm she was living in so that he wouldn't know where she lived. She had also found out that her ex was attempting to befriend the people she knew in an attempt to find out where she was living, where she spent her time, and what she liked to do and when. She wanted to warn us in case he approached us, so that we would keep our distance and not reveal any information about her routines. She told us his name, and his name was Ryan. Amelia and I both looked at each other in shock. To confirm, we asked Rachel to describe what he looked like, and she described our new cigarette buddy and classmate to a freaking T. We immediately informed Rachel about the interactions we had been having with Ryan, and Rachel informed us that we were in the 5th and 6th people she had confirmed that Ryan was attempting to make contact with. Of course, we immediately started to avoid him, switching up her routines to make sure we left the area immediately after class ended. A few weeks later, Ryan stopped showing up to class. Neither of us ever saw him again. A few weeks after that, Rachel informed Amelia and I that Ryan had been expelled from school. He had sexually assaulted another student at a party. When they went to collect evidence from his dorm room, they found a detailed ledger of information he had collected about Rachel, and pieces of writing about all of the horrendous things he wanted to do to her. I'm not entirely sure what happened to him, but in case this message was not clear, no Ryan, let's not meet. When I was about 6 years old in 2004, my mom started taking my sister and I to Dr. Daniel's pediatric dental office. The dental center was located inside a giant yellow mansion that also doubled as Dr. Daniel's house. It was honestly gorgeous. When I first started going to the dentist, I was extremely shy and actually suffered from selective mutism and had a lot of autistic-like tendencies. Needless to say, I relied heavily on my mother's comfort and for someone to give me a voice, because it was extremely anxiety-inducing for me to talk to strangers, especially men for some reason. When my sister and I got called in from the waiting room, my mom followed us to the office until she was told by Dr. Daniels that parents were not allowed to be with their children, as it taught kids independence, to which my mom complied to. Once in there, he immediately separated my sister and I, and in reaction to that, I cried because I felt so scared. Dr. Daniels did not like crying, so he grabbed me and put his hands over my mouth and nose, shook me, and aggressively warned me that if I continued to cry and scare the other kids, that he would make a situation a lot worse. Obviously, this scared me even more, so I started to cry again. Dr. Daniels had enough and took me into his house part of the dentist's office, where he screamed at me again, grabbed me by the neck, and shoved me. His hygienist Judy came over and told me if I continued to cry, she would spank me so hard I wouldn't know what hit me. Afterwards, he gave me a juice concoction and left me alone in his house for about 5 minutes until he took me back into the dental office and did work on my teeth. I guess I just instinctively knew that if I wanted to survive, I just had to act like I was not terrified and hold on the tears. All I wanted was my mommy. After the first appointment, my sister and I told my mom that we were scared of the dentist and that he was a mean man, but she just took it as me being an anxious child, so we continued to see him. Each visit was just as terrifying. Every time he pulled into the mansion, my heart just melted away inside my chest. I was so scared. It was no longer pretty to look at. Every time we went to the dentist, Dr. Daniels, or the tooth man as he called himself, always had us have heavy dental work procedures done. We had seals done on several baby teeth, and plenty of teeth removed, some with his fingers, some with no regards to pain levels at all. And often when having a tooth removal or seals done, your mouth had to be opened up with a retractor. He would leave us there with this retractor on for about 45 minutes or so before he came to work on our teeth. Sometimes he would eat his lunch while we sat there with our mouth open. Probably one of the worst pains I have ever felt in my life. I remember one time when I was about in 3rd grade, I had been leaned down in the chair waiting with the retractor on for an hour. I was in so much pain I couldn't take it. I sat up on the chair and tried to scream and cry as loud as I could. Dr. Daniels came rushing over, angry as could be, took my retractor off, and then took me back into his house part again, where he screamed at me for being a big baby and scaring off all the other kids. I was so sad in myself because I hadn't cried in so long, and then took me back to the other dentist chair and then pinned me down to my seat in a straitjacket. He put my retractor back on and said that I would have to wait longer because I caused such a scene. All I could do was shed silent tears and drool everywhere, and I couldn't even wipe it because he locked up my arms. Afterwards, my mouth would become so swollen and filled with rashes. It hurt to talk for days. It would leave bruises and swells as soon as I left his chair. He would often tell my mother I was a difficult patient if I so much as winced at his torture. Once he removed 6 of my teeth at once, and I could barely eat. While he ripped out teeth, he would often sing songs. It was so Sweeney Todd-like. When I was in the 7th grade, I started getting some new braces, and we started seeing an orthodontist. Not long after that, we stopped seeing Dr. Dan, and started seeing a new dentist, who was actually nice. I had never known that getting your teeth cleaned didn't have to feel like going through a saw trap. I think my mom took us out of Dr. Dan's practice when the orthodontist looked at our dental records and saw a lot of unnecessary procedures being done to our mouths. Not long ago, I was having a conversation with a friend about our childhood fears, and instantly my mind went to the tooth man. Curious, I googled him to see what had happened to him, and my happiness the practice was shut down, and left under his name was a Yelp page that was still left up. The page was filled with numerous 1-star reviews from former patients that were once abused as kids in his office, using the page as an outlet to express their trauma. I started to cry because their experiences were so close and some identical as to what I went through when I was a kid. It was so sad, but at the same time really validating to know I was not alone. A lot of the procedures we went through were just a scam for him to collect money off our parents' insurance. And now that I think about it, he probably was so adamant on us not crying and screaming for help because he didn't want parents to hear and come to see what was going on. I shake thinking about this. I really pray that he hasn't opened up another practice somewhere else. I know it's hard to not blame parents in this situation, but the truth is this man was just a swift abuser. For every bruise and swell we had, he would have dental explanations that would make the parents feel stupid for asking. He was an authority figure. I don't blame my mom for not believing us. She knew he was firm, but probably thought we were confusing firmness with meanness. To be honest, even writing this torture was so wild it actually sounds made up. She eventually did come around. She's not alone, as there were hundreds and hundreds of parents that were duped and deceived by him. To Dr. Dan, please, never let us meet again. And to any parent reading this, if you're ever told not to go in with your child to an appointment, something's really not right.